The sun had no mercy in the Arizona territory. It never did. Sagebrush flats stretched from horizon to horizon, cracked earth yawning open in long, pale fissures, as if the land itself had given up trying to hold together. The kind of heat that didn't just burn, it hollowed you out, dried your thoughts to dust before they could form into prayers. Kaya had been riding since before dawn. She sat straight on her paint mare, the way her father had taught her, spine like a lodgepole pine, eyes moving, never still. Her dark hair was braided back and wrapped with a strip of red trade cloth, and across her shoulders she wore a blanket of woven brown and cream, more for identity than warmth. Every Apache woman of her band wore the pattern. It told the world, I belong to someone, I have people. But that was becoming less true with every passing season. She crested a low ridge and pulled the mare to a stop. Below, maybe 200 yards down the slope, a wagon sat at a dead tilt in the dry wash. One wheel had dropped clean off its axle. The canvas cover sagged and flapped in the hot, directionless wind. Around it, scattered like dropped toys, were the contents of somebody's life: a rocking chair, a cast-iron pot, 3 wooden crates, a woman's bonnet caught on a mesquite branch, spinning slow. No horses. They'd pulled loose and run or been taken. Kaya watched for a long moment. Her hand rested near the knife at her hip, not gripping, just resting. She'd been raised to read stillness the way others read words on a page. The stillness here was wrong, too complete. Then she heard it. A low sound, not wind, not the creak of wood, something human. She clicked her tongue, and the mare moved forward, picking her way carefully down the rocky slope. He was under the wagon. Not hiding, collapsed. His long legs stuck out from beneath the wagon bed, boots worn down to almost nothing at the heels, one spur missing. His shirt had been white once. Now it was the color of the desert. A gash along his left temple had bled and dried and bled again, matting his dark hair against the side of his face. Kaya dismounted and crouched a few feet away. He was breathing, shallow but there. She looked at the surrounding ground. 4 sets of boot prints besides his. Horses, 4 horses. A scuffle, a drag mark, then the boots just left. Whoever had done this had taken everything worth taking and ridden south toward the border. Outlaws, or worse, men who thought the law didn't reach this far out, and they were right. She stood and studied the man for another moment. He had a strong jaw, dark with several days of stubble, big hands. A cowboy's hands, rope calloused, scarred across the knuckles. He wore no ring. He carried nothing on him but a broken-strapped saddlebag, empty now, and a revolver still in its holster. They hadn't taken the gun, hadn't wanted to get close enough to take it, or hadn't had time. She towed his boot with hers. He groaned but didn't wake. Kaya looked at the sky. The sun was beginning its long westward slide. By dark it would drop 20 degrees. A man who'd lost this much blood, lying on open ground, he might not make it to morning. She could leave him. She had her own problems. Her band's winter camp was still 3 days' ride north. Her father, Chief Ahanu, had sent her south alone to trade for medicine roots from the canyon healers, a woman's errand, he'd called it, which she understood to mean a safe errand. The territory was not safe. It had not been safe for a long time. She could leave him, and nobody would fault her for it. Instead, she pulled the blanket from her mare's back, rolled it, and knelt beside the man. "Hey," she said in English. Her English was careful and precise. She'd learned it from a missionary woman 10 years ago, and she'd practiced it the way her father had told her to practice everything, until it felt like breathing. "Hey, wake up." "Nothing." She pressed 2 fingers to the pulse at his throat, strong enough. She looked at the head wound, not deep enough to be the killing blow. What was killing him was the heat, dehydration, the slow drain of blood and water and will. She had a water skin, nearly full. She unstopped it and trickled a slow stream across his cracked lips. He moved, his head turned, his lips parted. She gave him more. His eyes opened. They were gray, not the pale gray of a winter sky, but a deep, storm-coming gray, and they were confused and frightened before they found focus. And then they found her face, and they went very still. "Don't," she said before he could move. "You'll open it again." He stared at her, his mouth worked. "Apache," he managed. "Yes." "Am I?" He tried to sit up, and she put one firm hand on his chest and pushed him back down. "You're alive," she said. "For now, stay still." He stayed still. His name was Cole Maddox. He told her this an hour later, when she'd cleaned the gash on his temple with water and wrapped it with a strip torn from the ruined canvas of the wagon. He'd managed to sit up by then, back against the tilted wheel, watching her with those storm-gray eyes. "Cole Maddox," she repeated, testing the sounds. "What were you carrying in this wagon?" "Wasn't my wagon." He touched the bandage with 2 fingers, winced. "Belonged to a family I was guiding. Hendersons, husband, wife, 2 kids." He paused. "They got away on horseback when the outlaws hit us, or I hope they did. I told them to ride. I stayed back to hold the road. Alone. I had 6 shots." A faint, humorless pull at the corner of his mouth. "Got 4 of them off before one of them threw a rock at my head. Not exactly my finest hour." "You're alive. You keep saying that like it's debatable." "It was," she said simply. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at the desert around them, the gathering shadows, the vast emptiness in every direction. "You're alone," he said. It wasn't an accusation, just an observation. The way he said it told her he understood what that meant out here. "I am often alone," she said. "I prefer it." "Where are you headed?" "North, my father's camp." He nodded slowly. His color was coming back, not much but a little. He was strong. She'd known that from the pulse beneath her fingers. "I owe you," he said. "Yes." He almost smiled at that. Most white men would have protested, "No, no, don't mention it," as though acknowledging a debt was somehow shameful. This one just accepted it, plain and direct. She decided she could tolerate him. "Can you ride?" she asked. "Give me until morning." "I'll give you until dawn." They rode north for 2 days. The first day, Cole rode behind her on the paint mare, his big hands resting on his own knees, never touching her unless the mare stumbled and he had to catch his balance. He was careful about it. She noticed that. They spoke little. She pointed out water. He pointed out, once, a trio of riders on a far ridge, outlaws. By their movement, and they changed course without discussing it, as though they'd been traveling together for years. He was good at stillness. That surprised her. Most white men she'd met were restless, loud with their presence, filling silence with noise the way they filled land with fences. Cole Maddox wore the desert like it fit him. On the second day, she found a rancher's broke-down horse at a dry creek crossing, old, swayback, but walking sound, and Cole took it without complaint, shortening the stirrups with rope. "You can go your own way now," she told him when they mounted up that morning. He looked at the horse, looked at the open desert to the east, where the nearest town might be 40 miles or might be 60. "Which direction's your camp?" he asked. She pointed north. "Then I'll ride north," he said, "for a while." She should have argued, she didn't. They smelled the camp before they saw it. Wood smoke, horse, the particular smell of a people who had lived in one place long enough to press their presence into the soil. The camp was tucked into a wide canyon mouth, sheltered on 3 sides by red rock walls that held the day's warmth long into the night. Maybe 40 lodges, some covered in trade canvas now, some still in the old way. Horses in the rope corral, children running among the fire rings, women working at the edge of the camp. And men, a half-circle of men, appearing from between the lodges as Kaya and Cole rode in, as though they'd been expected. Which they had been. The camp always had watchers on the high rocks. Kaya did not hesitate. She rode straight to the center of camp, stopped, and dismounted with easy dignity, ignoring the stares fixed on Cole. Her father emerged from the largest lodge. Chief Ahanu was 60 years old and looked like something carved from the canyon walls themselves, broad, weathered, permanent. His face carried every treaty he'd signed and watched broken, every hard winter, every loss. But his eyes were sharp and black and missed nothing. He looked at Cole. He looked at Kaya. "You brought a white man," he said in Apache. "He was dying," she said. "I brought him back to life. That makes him partly my responsibility." Ahanu was quiet for a long moment. Then, in English, clear, deliberate English that made Cole go very still on his swayback horse, he said, "Get down, eat, then we talk." The talking came after a meal of roasted venison and cornmeal, eaten by the fire in Ahanu's lodge. Cole ate with the focused gratitude of a man who hadn't been sure he'd eat again. He said little. He answered questions directly when Ahanu asked them, where he was from Texas, originally, what his work was, trail guide, ranch hand, whatever paid, whether he had family, a sister in Tucson, nobody else. Ahanu listened to all of it with the patience of a man who had spent 60 years listening to what people said and watching what they meant. When the meal was done, Ahanu refilled his pipe and was quiet for a while. Then he said, "My daughter saves your life. You ride 2 days with her. You are honest. You are not afraid." He paused. "But you cannot stay in my camp without a place." Cole looked at him carefully. "What kind of place?" Ahanu set the pipe down. "My daughter needs a husband," he said. "I have had 3 men here this summer who asked for her. She refused them all." He did not look at Kaya, but the edges of his words were faintly amused. "She says none of them were worthy." Kaya, sitting to her father's left, said nothing. Her face gave nothing. "I'm not asking to marry your daughter," Cole said, carefully respectful. "I'm grateful to her. That's different." "Yes," Ahanu said, "but I am asking you to stand with the others tomorrow. There is a 3rd man coming from the southern band, one of ours. He will make his case." He paused. "You will also make your case." And then he looked at Kaya, and now there was no mistaking the quiet mischief in those dark eyes. "She will choose." Kaya looked at her father with an expression that suggested she had several things to say about this, and was choosing, very deliberately, to say none of them right now. Cole looked at Kaya. Kaya looked at Cole. She looked away first. The morning came in gold and copper, the canyon walls catching the early light and throwing it warm across the camp. Kaya did not sleep. She sat outside her lodge in the hour before dawn and watched the stars dissolve into pale blue and thought about choices. About the 3 men who had come before, 2 from neighboring bands, one the son of a rancher who'd wanted an alliance more than a wife. All of them respectable. All of them presenting themselves the way a man presents a horse at auction. "Look at my qualities. Look at what I offer. Look at what you'd be getting." None of them had looked at her the way Cole Maddox had looked at her when she'd crouched beside him in the dirt and saved his life. Not with want, not with assessment. With recognition, like he'd already known her somehow, and finding her there had only confirmed something he'd suspected. She pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes. "Father," she thought, "you are going to be insufferable about this." By mid-morning, the whole camp had arranged itself, with the practiced casualness of people pretending they were not watching something, around the open ground near the center fire. The man from the southern band arrived with his uncle and 2 horses. His name was Sanny. He was tall and serious and competent-looking, and Kaya knew within 30 seconds of seeing him that she would not choose him, because he looked at her the way her father's men looked at the canyon walls, nodding their usefulness. Cole stood to one side, slightly apart. He'd washed his face, combed his dark hair back with water, and he was wearing his least destroyed shirt, which was still fairly destroyed. He looked like what he was, a working man who'd been knocked around by the world and was still standing up straight. He had his hat in his hands, turning it slow. Ahanu stood before them both. He was not a man who wasted ceremony on what could be plain. He said, in both Apache and English so nobody missed anything, "My daughter is a free woman. She has refused before and she may refuse again, but she will choose. That is my law in my camp." He paused. "Tell her what you offer." Sanny spoke first. He spoke well about horses, about land, about the size of his family's herd, about the standing she would have in the southern band. His uncle nodded along. It was a solid argument. It was, Kaya thought, a very good argument for marrying a piece of land. Then Ahanu looked at Cole. Cole was quiet for a moment. He turned the hat another full rotation in his hands. "I'm not going to tell you about horses," he said at last. "I don't have many. I'm not going to tell you about land because I don't own any." He paused. "I'll tell you what I know how to do. I know how to work until the job is done. I know how to be quiet when quiet's needed and honest when honesty's going to cost me. I know how to make a camp hold through weather." He stopped again. "And I know that your daughter pulled me out of the dirt when she didn't have to and rode 2 days with me and didn't complain once about my company, and that's more than most people have ever given me." He looked at Kaya. "I can't promise you a throne," he said. "I can promise you that I'll spend every day making sure you don't regret whatever you decide." Silence. Ahanu looked at his daughter. The whole camp looked at his daughter. Kaya had spent her whole life reading landscapes, rock, sky, water, the angle of wind before a storm. She had not spent much time reading the landscape of her own heart. She found now that it wasn't difficult. It was only slightly terrifying. She looked at Sanny. She looked at Cole. She raised her hand, and she pointed at the cowboy. The camp did not erupt exactly, but there was a collective exhale that was almost the same thing, a release of held breath, followed immediately by several women beginning to talk at once and several men looking deeply unsurprised. Sanny took it with grace. He nodded once to Kaya, not wounded, just acknowledging, and then to Cole, and then he walked with his uncle back toward the corral to collect his horses. Cole stood completely still. Kaya walked to him. "You should know," she said, "that I am difficult." "I got that impression," he said. "I will not be managed. Wasn't planning on it. My father will want to approve every significant decision for at least the first year." Cole glanced at Ahanu, who was watching them with an expression of perfect, serene innocence. "He seems like a reasonable man," Cole said carefully. "He is a shrewd man," Kaya said. "There is a difference. I'll bear that in mind." She looked at him for a moment, this dusty, broke-down, honest cowboy who had no land and no horses, and had just agreed to marry into an Apache chief's family in front of 40 witnesses. "Why did you stay?" she asked. "When I told you to go, you stayed." He was quiet, then simply, "Where else was I going to go?" It was not a romantic answer. It was not poetry. It was the most truthful thing anyone had said to her in years. She turned and walked toward her father's lodge, and after a moment Cole followed. The ceremony was held at sunset, because Ahanu said that things sealed in the last light of the day held longer than things sealed in the ordinary brightness of noon. Kaya thought this was her father being poetic. She also thought he was probably right. There were no words spoken that she understood as promises, not exactly, but there were hands joined over a fire, and a cord of twisted red and white wound around both their wrists, and the smoke of cedar going up into the darkening sky, and her father's voice moving through the old forms of words that meant, this person, before all of us in this place." Cole stood beside her and repeated what he was told to repeat, in a language he didn't speak, with the careful attention of a man learning the words to something important. After, her aunt pressed a bowl of something hot into his hands and said something to him in rapid Apache that made 3 women laugh. "What did she say?" he asked Kaya. "She said you're too thin and she'll fix that." He looked down at the bowl. "I'm starting to really like your family." It was not simple. she had never thought it would be. The camp watched him for weeks with the careful patience of people who had been betrayed by outsiders before and had long since stopped taking anything on faith. He was watched when he worked, and he worked constantly, without being asked, finding what needed doing and doing it. He was watched when he spoke, and he was sparing with speech, but honest when he used it. He was watched when he was with Kaya, and here perhaps was where he surprised them most. He did not try to manage her. He did not try to translate her. He did not treat her like a prize he'd been handed or a situation he'd stumbled into. He learned. He was prodigiously, almost stubbornly good at learning. Within 6 weeks he had Apache words for horse, water, fire, good, wrong, and I don't understand, please say it again. He learned the right way to approach Ahanu. He learned which women in the camp were the ones who actually ran everything, and he treated them accordingly. He made mistakes. He made them openly and accepted correction without sulking. A young man in the camp, maybe 17, spent 3 days looking for reasons to dislike him, and eventually gave up and started following him around instead, learning how to splice rope. One evening, Kaya came back from the canyon spring to find Cole sitting with 4 children while they pointed at things and said the Apache words, and he attempted them catastrophically, and they dissolved into laughter, and he laughed too, big and unguarded, in a way she hadn't heard from him before. She stood at the edge of the firelight and watched this for a while. She had not expected to feel this quiet, expanding thing. Not the fire of want, she'd felt that before briefly, for men who hadn't been worth it, but something slower. Something that felt like the desert in the hour before rain, when the air changed and you knew in your bones that something was coming that would make everything greener. Part 5. The thing she had never been given. Her mother had died when Kaya was 9. She remembered her in pieces, the smell of sage and tallow, the sound of humming, the weight of a hand smoothing her hair. She remembered being held in a way that made the world feel contained, possible. After her mother died, there was her father, who loved her absolutely and showed it in the Apache way, through provision, through protection, through teaching. He had raised her to be capable and proud and unfrightened of the world. But he had not been able to give her everything. No father could. There were things she had wanted that had no name, not comfort exactly, not safety exactly. More like the feeling of being known by someone who had chosen to know her. The feeling of taking up space in someone's thoughts, not because she was useful or important or the chief's daughter, but because she was herself, specifically herself, and that was enough. She had not thought she would find this. She had, over the years, quietly made her peace with not finding it. She found it instead in the strange, ordinary minutes of a life, built sideways from where she'd expected. She found it in the way Cole turned when she came into a space, not to assess or address, just the simple automatic turn of a person whose attention lived, partly, wherever she was. She found it in the conversations they had in the dark of their lodge, in the hour before sleep. Talking about nothing in particular, his sister in Tucson, the names of the horses he'd ridden, a river he'd crossed once in spring flood and never forgot, her mother's humming, the way the canyon looked in early snow. She found it in the morning he went out at first light, in the first cold weeks of autumn, and came back with the specific plant, a difficult-to-find plant from the upper canyon, that her aunt needed for the medicine she was making for the camp's oldest elder. Nobody had asked him. He'd heard her aunt mention it 3 days before, in passing. He put it in her hands and said nothing, because it didn't require anything said. She told him, on a still night when the stars were extravagant and close, about the 3 men who had come before him. He listened without interrupting. When she finished, he said, "Why did you point at me?" She was quiet for a while. Then, "Because you looked at me like I was already a full thing, not a thing to be completed." He thought about this. "I think that's just what you are," he said. "A full thing, it doesn't take much looking to see it." She turned her head and looked at him in the dark. "You are sometimes," she said, "genuinely aggravating." Because I say something true. Because you say something true in a way that makes it sound simple. And then I have to reconsider things I spent years deciding. He almost smiled, she could hear it. What things? That I was all right alone. Silence. Were you? He asked. She looked at the stars for a long time. I was good at it, she said finally. That's different. The winter came hard and held long, as it sometimes did in the canyon country. The camp hunkered in and became its own small world, sealed by snow, warmed by fire and closeness, and the particular resilience of people who had survived hard winters before. Ahanu, who had spent 60 years being unreadable, was unreadable about Cole in a way that was, eventually, impossible to read as anything except approval. He taught him to play the stick game with the patience of a grandfather. He told him, once in English, a story about Kaya as a child that Kaya spent 3 days pretending she hadn't heard. The young man who had followed Cole around learning to splice rope was now his near-constant shadow. His name was Chayton. He was 17 and had a quick mind and no father, and Cole was careful and steady with him in a way that didn't announce itself. Kaya watched this and felt something rearrange inside her. Something she hadn't known was crooked becoming level. In the deep of winter, in the warm dark of their lodge, with snow against the walls and the fire low and even, Cole said, "Are you happy?" He asked it the way he asked most things, directly, without decoration, as though the answer mattered more than any particular response. Kaya considered the question with her full attention, the way she'd always approached anything worth taking seriously. She thought about the desert that had no mercy, about the woman she'd been riding alone through it, capable and solitary and quietly waiting for something she couldn't name, about a man under a wagon with storm-gray eyes and rope-calloused hands and the decency to accept a debt plainly, about a father watching his daughter with hidden satisfaction, about children laughing at ruined Apache pronunciation, about a plant from the upper canyon placed in an ant's hands without explanation, about a full thing recognized. Yes, she said. It was not a complicated answer. It was, she had come to understand, the best kind.